The warehouse in Tijuana reeked of blood and diesel fuel. Maria Hernandez pressed her trembling children against the concrete wall, watching through a crack in the shipping container as masked men executed 3 people in cold blood. Her phone was dead. The border was 20 miles away, and the killers were walking straight toward their hiding spot. "Please," she whispered to the scarred American who'd appeared like a ghost in the shadows. "Take my children. Leave me. Just get them out of here." Jake Morrison studied the terror in her eyes, the same look his wife had worn the night the Sinaloa cartel murdered his family. For 3 years he'd tracked these animals across 2 countries. Now they'd led him straight to another innocent family. "No," he said quietly, checking his weapon. "All of you come with me." Maria didn't know she was looking at the Pentagon's most lethal operative. She didn't know he'd been declared dead 2 years ago, and she had no idea that saving her family was about to ignite a war that would span from Mexico to Washington, D.C. But first, they had to survive the next 60 seconds. Jake counted 4 hostiles approaching their position. The man leading them bore the distinctive serpent tattoo on his neck. Carlos El Vibora Mendez, the enforcer who'd put a bullet in Jake's 8-year-old daughter's head. Jake's finger tightened on the trigger of his suppressed Sig Sauer. "When I move, you take your kids and run to the blue truck parked behind the building," Jake whispered to Maria. "Keys are in the visor. Drive north until you hit the checkpoint." Maria clutched her 7-year-old son Diego closer while her teenage daughter Sofia stood frozen in terror. "What about you? I'll be right behind you." The lie came easily. Jake had no intention of running. Not when El Vibora was 30 feet away. The footsteps grew louder. Spanish voices echoed off the corrugated metal walls. Jake recognized the second voice, Miguel Santos, El Vibora's lieutenant, the man who'd held Jake down and forced him to watch his family die. "Mira, there are more containers over here," Santos called out. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear but from anticipation. For 3 years he'd dreamed of this moment. The official mission that brought him to Tijuana was supposed to be reconnaissance only, track the cartel's weapons shipments, gather intel, report back to Langley. But fate had delivered his family's killers on a silver platter. "Senora," a gravelly voice called out in accented English. "We know you're here. Come out and we'll make this quick for your children." Maria's sob caught in her throat. Sofia grabbed her mother's arm, fingernails digging into flesh. Jake made his decision. He stepped out from behind the shipping container, weapon raised. "Looking for me, Carlos?" El Vibora spun around, his AK-47 sweeping toward Jake's position. But Jake was already moving, muscle memory from 100 combat missions taking over. 2 suppressed shots sent a mass dropped the first gunman. El Vibora dove behind a forklift as Jake's 3rd shot sparked off metal. "Morrison?" El Vibora's voice cracked with recognition and rage. "The dead man walks." Santos flanked left, spraying automatic fire. Jake rolled behind a concrete pillar as bullets chewed chunks from the wall. He heard Maria scream and prayed she was moving toward the exit. "You should have stayed dead, Navy boy," Santos shouted. "Just like your pretty wife and little girl." The taunt hit Jake like a physical blow, but he channeled the rage into cold precision. Santos was moving closer, reloading. Jake counted the seconds, then pivoted around the pillar with his weapon raised. Santos wasn't there. A gun barrel pressed against the base of Jake's skull. "Drop it." Jake's weapon clattered to the concrete floor. In his peripheral vision, he saw Maria frozen halfway to the exit, Diego crying in her arms. "I said run," Jake roared. El Vibora emerged from behind the forklift, grinning. "The family stays. We have plans for them." His cold eyes fixed on Sofia, the girl especially. White-hot fury exploded through Jake's veins. He drove his elbow back into Santos's ribs and spun as the man doubled over. Jake's knife materialized in his hand, sliding between Santos's ribs before the gunman could react. El Vibora raised his rifle, but Jake was already diving for his fallen pistol. 3 shots thundered through the warehouse. Jake felt fire tear across his shoulder as he rolled and came up shooting. El Vibora staggered backward, crimson spreading across his chest. He tried to bring his weapon up one last time, hatred burning in his dying eyes. Jake's final shot punched through the serpent tattoo on the man's throat. Silence fell over the warehouse like a shroud. Jake pressed his hand against his wounded shoulder, watching blood seep between his fingers. Maria stared at him with a mixture of terror and awe. "Is it over?" Sophia whispered. Jake looked at the two corpses, then at the innocent family cowering in the shadows. El Vibora and Santos were dead, but the Sinaloa cartel had 1,000 more soldiers, and Jake had just painted a target on all their backs. "No," he said grimly. "It's just beginning." The stranger's eyes swept over Elena's face with the precision of someone who learned to read fear, desperation, and lies in the span of a heartbeat. She watched his jaw tighten as he processed her words, and for a terrifying moment she thought he might walk away. "How many men?" His voice carried a rough edge that spoke of cigarettes or screaming or both. 3, maybe 4. Elena's words tumbled out. "They had guns, big ones. They shot him in the head and— Did they see you?" The question hit her like ice water. She'd been so focused on what she'd witnessed that the implications hadn't fully sunk in. "I don't know. Maybe. I ran." He studied the parking lot behind her, his gaze methodical and calculating. "Your car?" "The blue Honda." She pointed with a shaking finger. "Keys." Elena fumbled in her purse, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped everything. The stranger, she still didn't even know his name, took them without ceremony and started walking toward her car. She hurried to keep up with his long strides. "What are you doing?" "My kids are safer if we move fast and smart." He opened the driver's door and gestured for her to get in the passenger seat. "Where do they live?" "With my mother. West Side, near the elementary school." Elena slid into the seat, watching him adjust the mirrors with military efficiency. "I still don't know who you are." "Jake." He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, checking the rearview mirror constantly. "And you just watched the Morales cartel execute someone, which means your life expectancy just dropped to about 6 hours if we don't move." The casual way he said it made her stomach lurch. "How do you know about the cartel?" Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel, and Elena caught something dark flickering across his features. "Lucky guess. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now." He took a sharp right turn that had her grabbing the door handle. "Tell me about your kids. Ages, names, anything that matters." Elena's maternal instincts warred with her fear of this stranger, but the urgency in his voice won out. "Sophia's 8, Miguel's 6. They're good kids. They listen." Her voice cracked. "They don't deserve this." "No kid does." The words came out harder than he'd probably intended, and Elena saw his knuckles go white. "Your mother, can she follow instructions without asking questions?" "She's tougher than she looks. Raised 4 kids in East LA during the 80s. Elena studied his profile, noting the scar that ran from his left temple to his cheekbone. "You've done this before." It wasn't a question, and Jake didn't treat it like one. Different situation, same outcome needed. They drove through neighborhoods that grew progressively more run down, past chain-link fences and corner stores with barred windows. Elena found herself stealing glances at Jake, trying to reconcile his calm demeanor with the intensity radiating from him. He drove like someone familiar with being hunted, checking mirrors, varying speed, taking unexpected turns. "There." She pointed to a small house with a front yard full of children's toys, the one with the Virgin Mary statue. Jake parked 2 houses down and killed the engine. "Stay here." "Like hell. Those are my children. And if the cartel's already here, walking up to that front door makes you a target they can't miss." His eyes met hers, and she saw something that might have been understanding. "Give me 2 minutes to clear the area. If I'm not back in 5, drive to the nearest police station." The police can't protect you from the cartel, but they can document your body." Jake was already out of the car. 2 minutes. Elena watched him move across the street with a predatory grace that sent chills down her spine. He wasn't just some good Samaritan who'd happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. Everything about him, from the way he held himself to the casual knowledge of cartel operations, screamed military or law enforcement or something darker. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother, kids asking about dinner. "When will you be home?" The normalcy of it made Elena want to cry. 2 hours ago, her biggest worry had been whether she could afford new school shoes for Miguel. Now she was sitting in her car while a stranger she'd begged for help assessed whether her children were already dead. Jake reappeared at her window, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. "Clear, but we move fast. Pack light, only what you can carry in one bag per person." "Pack? Where are we going?" "Somewhere that doesn't end with your kids identifying your body." Jake opened her door. "Elena, I need you to understand something. The moment you saw that execution, your old life ended. Right now, we're building you a new one. The question is whether your family survives the transition." Elena stared at her mother's house, at the toys scattered across the lawn where her children had been playing just hours ago, and felt the last of her denial crumble away. Maya's hands trembled as she buckled Sophia into a car seat, the plastic clips slipping through her sweaty fingers. The stranger, Jake, stood by the kitchen window, his body coiled like a spring as he watched the street through a gap in the curtains. "Where are we going?" Sophia asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "On an adventure," Maya managed, forcing lightness into her voice. "Remember how we talked about adventures?" Jake's voice cut through the forced cheer. "We need to move, now." Maya grabbed the overnight bag she kept packed, a habit born from years of late-night emergency calls from the restaurant, though she'd never imagined needing it for this. Her hands shook as she stuffed in extra clothes for the kids, toiletries, the few $100s she kept hidden in a coffee tin. "Mama, you're scaring me." Sophia's lower lip quivered. Jake appeared beside them, his presence somehow both threatening and reassuring. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching to Sophia's eye level. His voice transformed completely, gentle, warm. "What's your rabbit's name?" "Mr. Hopscotch." "That's a great name. Mr. Hopscotch looks brave. Think he's ready for an adventure?" Sophia nodded solemnly, and Maya felt something crack inside her chest. This stranger understood children. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Who was he really? "My truck's out back," Jake said, standing. "We go through the rear door, straight to the vehicle. No stopping, no looking around. Understood?" Maya nodded, lifting Diego from his high chair. The baby fussed, sensing the tension in the room. She grabbed his diaper bag with her free hand, her movements jerky with adrenaline. Jake moved to the back door, pressing his ear against it before slowly turning the handle. The hinges creaked, a sound that had never bothered Maya before but now seemed loud enough to wake the dead. The alley behind her building was narrow, crowded with dumpsters and scattered debris. Jake's truck sat 20 feet away, a black Ford F-150 with tinted windows. He moved first, scanning the area with predatory awareness, then motioned them forward. Maya's legs felt like water. Each step seemed to echo off the brick walls. Sophia's hand was small and warm in hers, trusting. The weight of that trust was crushing. They reached the truck without incident. Jake opened the rear door, revealing a pristine interior that smelled like leather and gun oil. He helped Sophia climb in, showing her how to buckle her seatbelt while Maya secured Diego in the infant carrier she'd grabbed from her car. As Jake started the engine, Maya caught sight of something that made her stomach drop. A black sedan was turning into her street, moving too slowly, windows too dark. "They're here," she whispered. Jake's eyes flicked to the rear-view mirror. "I see them. Stay down." He reversed smoothly, taking them deeper into the maze of alleys that crisscrossed the neighborhood. Maya had lived here for 3 years, but had never paid attention to these narrow passages between buildings. Jake navigated them like he'd memorized every turn. "Who are you?" she asked, as they emerged onto a side street she didn't recognize. "Someone who's been looking for them longer than they've been looking for you." The cryptic answer sent chills down her spine. "What does that mean?" Jake's jaw tightened. It means we have something in common now. They took something from me too." Maya studied his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the scar that disappeared into his hairline, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel like weapons. "You're not just some good Samaritan, are you?" "No." The single word carried weight, history, pain. "I'm not." Behind them, Sophia hummed quietly to Mr. Hopscotch, blissfully unaware that their world had just imploded. Diego had fallen asleep, his tiny fist curled against his cheek. Maya's children, her entire universe, now dependent on this dangerous stranger who spoke of vengeance in the same breath as protection. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe. I have a place." "For how long?" Jake's silence stretched until it became its own answer. This wasn't temporary. Whatever she'd witnessed, whatever she'd stumbled into, had just rewritten their lives completely. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the truck carry them away from everything familiar. When she opened them again, they were on the interstate, city lights fading behind them. Her phone buzzed, a text from her manager asking where she was, why she'd missed her shift. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. "I need to call my work," she said. "My family. They'll worry. No phones. Not yet. They can track—" "I have children," Maya interrupted, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I need to think about their future, their school, their lives," Jake finished quietly. "That's what we're thinking about right now. Everything else comes after we keep them breathing." The brutal honesty hit her like cold water. Maya looked back at her sleeping children and understood that the woman who'd left for work that morning was gone forever. The safe house sat 20 miles outside town, a weathered cabin that looked abandoned from the road. Marcus had acquired it 2 years ago under a shell company, one of several bolt holes he'd established during his hunt for the Serpientes cartel. Now, as he pulled Elena's battered Honda up the gravel drive, he wondered if bringing civilians here violated every protocol he'd sworn to follow. "Are we safe here?" Elena's voice cut through the engine noise as he killed the ignition. In the passenger seat, she held her sleeping son, while Sophia pressed against the window, wide-eyed at the surrounding forest. "Safer than anywhere else right now," Marcus replied, scanning the tree line out of habit. No movement, no glint of scope glass. The motion sensors he'd placed would have alerted his phone to any approach. "Come on." Inside, the cabin revealed its true purpose. What appeared to be a simple hunting lodge from outside contained surveillance equipment, weapons caches, and communication gear that would make a federal task force jealous. Marcus watched Elena take it all in, her dark eyes moving from the bank of monitors to the tactical gear hanging on wall pegs. "Jesus," she whispered, "who are you really?" Marcus pulled protein bars and water bottles from a supply cabinet, avoiding her gaze. "Someone who's been tracking the people who want to hurt you." "That's not an answer." Sophia tugged at her mother's shirt. "Mummy, I'm hungry." Elena's maternal instincts overrode her questions, at least temporarily. Marcus showed them to a small bedroom with bunk beds while he heated soup on a camp stove. The domestic normalcy felt foreign after months of solitary surveillance and violence. When had he last shared a meal with anyone who wasn't trying to kill him? As they ate, Sophia gradually warmed to his presence, chattering about school and her favorite cartoons. Diego remained quiet but watchful, old enough at 12 to sense the undercurrents of danger. Elena picked at her food, stealing glances at Marcus when she thought he wasn't looking. "The men you saw today," Marcus said once the children had settled in the bedroom with a portable DVD player. "Tell me exactly what happened." Elena wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, knuckles white. "I was walking back from the grocery store, the shortcut through the industrial district. I know it's not safe, but it saves 15 minutes, and I had to pick up the kids." She trailed off, guilt creeping into her voice. "You did nothing wrong." "I heard voices from inside the warehouse. Angry voices. I should have kept walking, but one of them was screaming, begging in Spanish. So I looked through a gap in the siding." She shuddered. There were 4 men, 3 standing over one kneeling. The one kneeling had been beaten badly. His face was God, there was so much blood. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Did you recognize any of them? The leader, tall, thin, with a scar running from his ear to his jaw. He spoke with an accent, not Mexican, something else. He kept calling the beaten man a traitor, asking about the shipment and the gringo. Then Elena's voice broke. Take your time. He shot him 3 times, and while the man was dying, the killer looked right at me. Our eyes met through that gap, and I knew he saw me. I ran, but I could hear them shouting, footsteps following. That's when I found you. The description sent ice through Marcus's veins. Alejandro Vega, the Serpientes enforcer. The same man who'd tortured Marcus's former teammate Jake Morrison for information about a DEA operation gone wrong. The same man who'd killed Jake's wife and daughter to send a message. The gringo they mentioned, Marcus said carefully, could be important. Did they say anything else about him? Elena closed her eyes, concentrating. Something about a debt, that the traitor had promised to deliver the seal but failed. Her eyes snapped open. You know what this is about. Marcus stood abruptly, moving to the window. In the glass reflection, he could see Elena watching him, putting pieces together with frightening speed. Outside, darkness had fallen completely. Motion sensor lights illuminated the perimeter in overlapping pools of white. 3 months ago, I cost them a major drug shipment, he said finally. 20 million in heroin, plus 6 of their soldiers. They've been looking for me ever since. So this is your fault? Elena's voice carried steel now, protective fury overriding fear. My children are in danger because of your war? Your children are in danger because you witnessed a murder. Marcus turned to face her. But you're right. My presence here makes things more complicated. Then leave. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus studied her face, seeing the mother's desperate calculation. If he left, maybe the cartel would lose interest. Maybe her family could disappear, start over somewhere safe. She was wrong, of course. Vega never left loose ends, but Marcus understood her hope. I can't do that, he said quietly. Why not? Because Jake's ghost wouldn't let him run again. Because some debts could only be paid in blood. Because the moment their eyes met in that alley, Elena Vasquez had become his responsibility. Instead, he simply said, because they'll kill you anyway. The warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, a perfect cover for what Marcus needed to do. He'd chosen this abandoned auto repair shop on the outskirts of town for good reason. No neighbors to hear screaming, multiple exit routes, and thick concrete walls that would muffle gunshots if things went sideways. Elena sat in the passenger seat of his truck, her hands trembling as she watched him pull tactical gear from a duffel bag. The children were safely hidden at a safe house 30 miles away, guarded by the only person Marcus trusted completely, his former teammate Rico. But seeing the fear in Elena's eyes made something twist in his chest, a protective instinct he'd thought died with his own family. You don't have to do this, she whispered as he checked his sidearm. We could just run. Take the kids and disappear. Marcus paused, his finger tracing the worn grip of his Sig Sauer. He'd had this conversation with himself 1,000 times over the past 3 years. Run or fight, hide or hunt. Every time the faces of his wife and daughter pulled him back into the darkness. Running doesn't work with Vasquez, he said, his voice flat. I tried that once. He found me anyway. Elena's breath caught. This isn't just about us, is it? Before Marcus could answer, the rumble of approaching engines cut through the evening air. 3 black SUVs rolled into the warehouse lot, their windows tinted dark as obsidian. Marcus counted at least 12 men as they emerged, assault rifles glinting in the dying sunlight. Stay down, he ordered Elena, then activated his throat mic. Rico, you copy? Loud and clear, hermano. Kids are secure. You sure about this play? Marcus watched Carlos Vasquez step out of the lead vehicle, his expensive suit incongruous against the industrial backdrop. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see the gold tooth that had haunted his nightmares, the same tooth he'd glimpsed through a hotel window in Kandahar as his family burned. I'm sure. Elena grabbed his arm as he reached for the door handle. Her touch was electric, sending an unexpected jolt through his system. "Marcus, please, don't let revenge destroy what's left of your soul." He looked down at her hand on his arm, so small and desperate, and for a moment he wavered. In her dark eyes he saw something he'd forgotten existed: hope. Not for himself, but for the possibility that some battles could be won without losing everything in the process. "This isn't revenge," he said quietly. "This is justice." Marcus slipped out of the truck and moved through the shadows, every muscle memory from his SEAL training flooding back. The warehouse had multiple levels connected by a maze of catwalks and maintenance ladders. He'd spent 2 days preparing this killing field, placing charges at structural weak points and positioning weapons caches throughout the building. Vasquez's voice echoed off the concrete walls as his men spread out. "Senor Walker, I know you're here. You have something that belongs to me, the woman who saw too much. Return her, and perhaps I'll make your death quick." Marcus reached the first weapons cache and armed himself with an M4 carbine. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory overriding the tremor of adrenaline. Through his scope, he watched 2 sicarios move toward the truck where Elena waited. "You killed my family in Afghanistan," Marcus called out, his voice amplified by the warehouse acoustics. "Burned them alive while I was deployed. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Wouldn't come for you?" Vasquez's laughter was cold as winter steel. "Ah, the grieving husband finally reveals himself. Your wife," she begged very prettily before the end. "Your daughter, too." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, but instead of rage, he felt something colder settle over him, the ice calm of a professional killer. He'd learned long ago that emotion was a liability in combat. The time for grief was after the mission. He squeezed the trigger. The first shot dropped one of the men approaching Elena's position. The second took down his partner before the body hit the ground. Chaos erupted as muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse like deadly fireworks. Marcus moved through the shadows like a ghost, using his elevated position to devastating advantage. These weren't soldiers. They were street thugs with military weapons but no tactical training. He picked them off systematically, each shot precise and final. But Vasquez was smarter than his men. While Marcus focused on the immediate threats, the cartel leader had flanked around to the truck. Through his scope, Marcus saw the barrel of a pistol pressed against Elena's temple. "Enough," Vasquez shouted. "Show yourself, or I paint the inside of this truck with her brains." Marcus froze on the catwalk, his crosshairs centered on Vasquez's head. The shot was clean. He could take it. But if he missed by even an inch, if Vasquez's finger twitched as he died, Elena would pay the price. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus hesitated. The safe house sat 40 miles north of the city, a weathered cabin nestled between towering pines that whispered secrets in the mountain wind. Elena clutched Maya closer as Jake pulled the stolen truck behind a grove of aspen trees, their golden leaves catching the last rays of sunlight. "This is it?" Elena's voice carried doubt as she surveyed the modest structure. After hours of terror, the quiet felt almost dangerous. Jake killed the engine and scanned the tree line through practiced eyes. "It'll do for tonight." He'd used this place before, during his darker days when the line between mission and vendetta had blurred beyond recognition. Sophia stirred in the back seat, her fever breaking at last. "Mama, where are we?" "Somewhere safe, mija." Elena helped her daughter from the truck, noting how Jake moved with predatory awareness, his hand never straying far from the weapon at his hip. Inside, the cabin revealed sparse furnishings and military efficiency. Jake checked the windows while Elena settled the girls on the worn sofa. A generator hummed to life somewhere outside, and warm light flooded the space. "There's food in the kitchen," Jake said, his voice softer now. "I'll take first watch." Elena found canned soup and crackers, grateful for any normalcy. As she heated dinner on the small stove, she watched Jake through the kitchen window. He stood motionless at the forest's edge, a sentinel against the gathering darkness. Maya tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Is the scary man going to hurt us?" The question hit Elena like a physical blow. No, baby, he's helping us. But even as she said it, uncertainty gnawed at her. What did she really know about this man who'd appeared like an avenging angel? His movements spoke of violence mastered. His eyes held shadows that ran deeper than the mountain valleys around them. After dinner, Sophia's energy returned enough for her to pepper Jake with questions. Are you a soldier? Do you have kids? Why do you have so many scars? Elena started to shush her daughter, but Jake surprised them both by sitting cross-legged on the floor, meeting Sophia at eye level. I was a soldier, yes, a long time ago. His voice carried careful control. And the scars, sometimes when you protect people, you get hurt in the process. Sophia considered this with 8-year-old logic. Did it work? Did you protect them? The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, not always. Later, after the girls had fallen asleep in the cabin's single bedroom, Elena found Jake on the porch. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and distant snow. Thank you, she said, settling into the chair beside him. For everything. Jake's laugh held no humor. Don't thank me yet. Valdez won't stop hunting you. This is just the beginning. Why are you helping us? Really? Elena studied his profile in the moonlight. Most people would have called the police and walked away. For a long moment, only the wind answered. Then Jake spoke, his words barely audible above the rustling leaves. 3 years ago, I had a family too, a wife, a daughter about Maya's age. His hands clenched into fists. I was tracking Valdez then, working off book intelligence. Thought I was being careful, keeping my work separate from my life. Elena's breath caught. What happened? They found out about Sarah and Emma, used them to get to me. His voice turned hollow, mechanical. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I found their bodies in our kitchen. The words hit Elena like physical blows. She understood now, the careful way he watched her daughters, the barely contained violence that simmered beneath his controlled exterior. That's why you're after Valdez. I've been hunting him ever since. But he's like smoke, always one step ahead, always disappearing into the wind. Jake turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw grief transformed into something harder than diamond. Until now. Until you. I'm bait. You're a witness. The first one who's survived long enough to testify. With your testimony we can... We? Elena leaned forward. Who exactly are you working with, Jake? Another silence stretched between them. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness, its voice lonely and wild. People who want Valdez stopped. People who understand that sometimes justice requires operating outside the law. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. You're talking about revenge, not justice. Maybe there's no difference anymore. A twig snapped somewhere in the forest below. Both of them froze, listening. Jake's hand moved to his weapon as he scanned the tree line. Get inside, he whispered. Wake the girls. We may need to move. As Elena crept toward the cabin door, her heart hammering against her ribs, one thought crystallized with terrifying clarity. She'd placed her children's lives in the hands of a man driven by vengeance. The question now was whether his ghosts would save them or destroy them all. The safe house smelled of stale coffee and tension. Maya sat at the edge of the worn couch, watching Jake methodically check weapons at the kitchen table. Each movement was precise, economical, the habits of a man who'd done this countless times before. Her children slept in the back bedroom, finally exhausted from fear and adrenaline. Tell me about Cordero, she said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for the past hour. Jake's hands stilled on the disassembled pistol. What do you want to know? Everything. If my family is going to die because I saw him murder someone, I deserve to understand why. He set down the gun's slide, his jaw tight. Cordero runs the most brutal trafficking operation on the West Coast. Drugs, weapons, people. If there's money in human misery, he's got his hands in it. That's not what I'm asking. Maya leaned forward. I'm asking why you know him. Why you have a warehouse full of surveillance equipment with his picture plastered all over the walls. The question hung in the air like smoke. Jake's fingers traced the scar on his forearm, a nervous habit she'd noticed whenever the conversation turned personal. 3 years ago, I was part of a joint task force, Navy SEALs working with DEA to take down high-value targets in Mexico. His voice carried the flat tone of someone recounting facts to avoid feeling them. We had intelligence on a major shipment coming through a border town. What we didn't know was that Cordero was using local families as human shields. Maya's stomach clenched. She could guess where this was going. My team went in hard and fast like we always did, but when we breached the warehouse, it wasn't just cartel soldiers waiting for us. Jake's hands had stopped moving entirely. Cordero had chained civilians, men, women, children, to support beams throughout the building. Any gunfire would have killed them. What happened? We hesitated. For maybe 3 seconds, we hesitated while we tried to figure out how to extract the hostages. Jake's laugh was bitter. That's all the time Cordero needed. He triggered explosives that brought down half the building. My team leader, Rodriguez, good man, had twin daughters back home. He threw himself over a family when the ceiling came down. Maya reached out instinctively, her hand covering his scarred forearm. Jake. 6 civilians died, 2 of my teammates, and Cordero walked away because I couldn't make the hard choice fast enough. He pulled away from her touch, resuming his weapon maintenance. The military called it an acceptable loss ratio. Cordero called it a message about what happens when you come after him. So you went after him anyway. I finished my tour and got out. Been tracking him ever since. Jake's fingers worked with practiced efficiency, reassembling the pistol. Every safe house he uses, every lieutenant in his organization, every route his shipments take. I know more about Miguel Cordero than his own mother did. Maya studied his profile in the dim light, the sharp angles of his face, the way his shoulders carried invisible weight. This isn't about justice anymore, is it? It's about guilt. His hands froze again. When he looked at her, she saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Maybe. Does it matter? It matters because guilt makes people reckless, and reckless people get kids killed. She kept her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Emma and Diego aren't Rodriguez's daughters. They're mine. And I need to know that when the shooting starts, you'll choose their lives over your vendetta. Jake set the reassembled weapon on the table with deliberate care. You think I'd risk them for revenge? I think you're a good man carrying a bad wound. But good intentions don't stop bullets. Maya stood, moving to the window to check the street below. How many people has Cordero killed since you started hunting him? Dozens. And how many would still be alive if you'd just called in an airstrike on his compound instead of playing this cat-and-mouse game? The question hit its mark. Jake's face went stone still. It's not that simple, isn't it? Maya turned back to face him. Or do you need him to suffer the way you've been suffering? Need him to know it's coming? Need him to feel helpless while you close in? Maya. I've been helpless before, Jake. When Diego's father decided his fists were more important than our family, I felt helpless every single day. You know what changed that? She moved closer, her voice dropping. The moment I stopped trying to fix him and started protecting my children instead. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Outside, a police siren wailed in the distance, a reminder that the city continued its nightly dance of violence while they sat in their fragile bubble of safety. Jake finally spoke, his voice rough. Cordero won't stop hunting you. Not ever. You know that, right? Then we end it. Maya met his gaze steadily, but we end it smart, not angry. The abandoned warehouse sat like a concrete tumor against the industrial skyline, its broken windows staring blindly at the approaching dawn. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the building through binoculars as the last of the night shift guards made their rounds. 3 men, AK-47s, slung casually across their shoulders, cigarette embers glowing in the darkness. His earpiece crackled. Thermal shows 12 bodies inside. 2 on the ground floor, rest are upstairs. Reynolds' voice was barely a whisper from his position on the adjacent rooftop. Movement patterns suggest they're relaxed. This is as good as it gets. Marcus lowered the binoculars and checked his watch. 4:17 a.m. In 2 hours the morning crew would arrive, tripling their numbers. But somewhere in that concrete maze, Elena's children were waiting in terror, probably wondering if their mother was ever coming back. The thought of Sophia's wide, trusting eyes and little Miguel's shy smile made his chest tighten. When was the last time he'd felt this desperate urge to protect someone? Not since. He shoved the memory away. Focus. The mission. Moving to position, he whispered into his mic, slipping from shadow to shadow along the warehouse's perimeter. The building had been constructed in the 70s, back when security meant thick walls and limited entry points. Now those same features worked against the cartel, creating a funnel that would force them to fight on his terms. Marcus reached the service entrance, a heavy steel door that hung slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could hear voices speaking rapid Spanish, punctuated by bursts of laughter. Someone was telling a story about a woman in Tijuana. Another voice complained about the early hour, normal men doing horrific work. It should have made this easier, but somehow it didn't. He slipped inside, moving through a maze of conveyor belts and packaging equipment left over from the building's legitimate days. The air smelled of motor oil, rust, and something else, something metallic that made his stomach clench. Blood, recent blood. A wooden staircase led to the second floor, its steps worn smooth by decades of use. Marcus tested each one carefully, distributing his weight to minimize creaks. Above him, a radio played Mexican folk music, the volume just loud enough to mask his approach. At the top of the stairs, a narrow hallway stretched toward the back of the building. 3 doors on the left, 2 on the right, and voices coming from the far end. Marcus pressed himself against the wall and advanced, his silenced pistol drawn. The first door stood open, revealing an empty room filled with plastic chairs arranged in a rough circle. Bloodstains darkened the concrete floor. This was where they brought people to die, he realized, where they'd probably brought Elena if she hadn't managed to run. The second door was locked, but the third hung ajar. Marcus peered through the gap and felt his heart stop. Sophia sat in the corner, her arms wrapped around Miguel, both of them gagged and zip-tied. The little girl's eyes were red from crying, but when she saw him, they went wide with recognition. Miguel was asleep against his sister's shoulder, his face streaked with tears. Marcus held a finger to his lips, and Sophia nodded frantically. Smart girl. He tested the door, unlocked. But between him and the children, 2 guards sat at a folding table, playing cards and sharing a bottle of tequila. His earpiece crackled again. Compound's waking up. We've got maybe 10 minutes before shift change. Marcus studied the guards through the crack. Both young, maybe early 20s. One had a tattoo of Santa Muerte crawling up his neck. The other kept checking his phone, probably texting a girlfriend. Kids, really. Kids who'd chosen the wrong side of an ancient war. He thought of his own team, of Jackson and Phillips, and the others who'd died because he'd hesitated at the wrong moment, because he'd tried to find another way when the only way was through violence. Not this time. Marcus moved through the door like smoke, his knife finding the first guard's throat before the man could draw breath to scream. The second guard lurched upright, hands scrambling for his sidearm, but Marcus was already there, the blade sliding between ribs to find the heart. Both men dropped without a sound. Sophia made a muffled noise behind her gag, and Marcus realized she'd watched the whole thing. Her eyes were huge, no longer seeing him as the kind stranger who'd helped her mother. Now she saw what he really was, a killer, efficient and remorseless. Miguel stirred as Marcus cut their restraints, his sleepy confusion giving way to relief when he recognized the man from the market. But Sophia just stared, even as Marcus lifted her brother and whispered that everything would be okay. She knew better now. She'd seen the truth that Elena suspected but couldn't quite accept, that some people were born for darkness, and sometimes darkness was the only thing standing between innocence and the abyss. His earpiece crackled with urgent static. Time was up. The motel room felt smaller, with Marcus pacing like a caged predator. Elena watched him check the windows for the third time in 10 minutes, his movements sharp and controlled. The kids had finally fallen asleep on one of the beds, exhausted from the day's terror, but she couldn't shake the image of Vasquez's cold smile from her mind. "We can't stay here much longer," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned from the window, and in the dim light filtering through the curtains, she could see the weight he carried, not just from today, but from years of something darker. "Where else can we go? You said yourself they have eyes everywhere." Elena pulled the thin motel blanket tighter around her shoulders. "And you haven't told me what this is really about, why they want me dead so badly." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, hollow in a way that made her chest tighten. 3 years ago, I was part of a joint task force, Navy SEALs working with DEA to dismantle Vasquez's operation from the inside. He sat heavily in the chair across from her, elbows on his knees. "We had an asset, someone close to Vasquez who was feeding us information." Elena waited, sensing there was more, something that explained the haunted look in his eyes. The asset was compromised, tortured. Before they died, they gave up the location of a safe house where my team was supposed to meet with their family. His hands clenched into fists. "My wife, my daughter, they were there. Vasquez wanted to send a message." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She understood now why he'd looked at Sofia and Miguel with such fierce protectiveness, why he'd thrown himself between them and danger without hesitation. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." "I found their bodies 2 days later." His voice was flat, emotionless, but she could see the storm beneath the surface. 8 years old. She would have been 11 now. Elena's throat closed up. She thought of her own children sleeping just feet away, how precious and fragile they suddenly seemed. "I've been hunting Vasquez ever since. Off the books. My own mission." Marcus looked up at her, and his eyes were dark pools of grief and rage. "When I saw those men coming for you and your kids, I couldn't let it happen again." Before Elena could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed instantly, every muscle in his body going taut. "What is it?" Movement, outside. 2 vehicles approaching from the east. He was already moving, grabbing his gear bag and checking his weapon. "We need to go, now." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she shook the children awake. "Sofia, Miguel, we have to leave." "Mama?" Sofia's voice was small and confused in the darkness. "It's okay, baby. Just stay close to me." Marcus had the back window open, cool night air rushing into the room. "There's a drainage canal about 50 yards behind the building. If we can reach it without being seen, we can follow it to the highway." The sound of car doors slamming reached them from the parking lot. Male voices speaking rapid Spanish. "They're at the front desk," Marcus whispered. 30 seconds, maybe less." Elena scooped Miguel into her arms while Sofia clung to her side. Marcus went first, dropping silently to the ground outside the window, then turned to help them down. The night was cold and sharp, full of shadows and the distant hum of highway traffic. Elena's feet hit the gravel and she stumbled slightly under Miguel's weight, but Marcus steadied her with a firm hand on her arm. Behind them, she heard the motel room door splinter open. They ran. Marcus led them in a low crouch across the open ground behind the motel, Elena's lungs burning as she struggled to keep up while carrying Miguel. Sofia ran beside her, silent and brave, though Elena could feel her trembling. Shouts erupted from the motel room. Flashlight beams swept the darkness behind them. The drainage canal was deeper than it looked, concrete walls slick with moisture and decades of debris. Marcus dropped down first, then reached up for the children. Elena handed Miguel down, then Sofia, before sliding into the canal herself. "This way," Marcus whispered, pointing toward the distant glow of the highway. "Stay low, stay quiet." As they moved through the darkness, Elena couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's daughter, 8 years old, like Miguel, a little girl who would never grow up because of the monster they were running from. She understood now that this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, and maybe, for Marcus, a chance at redemption he'd been seeking for 3 long years. The sound of pursuit grew fainter behind them, but Elena knew Vasquez wouldn't give up. He couldn't afford to let witnesses live. The safe house felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, coffee growing cold in his hands as he watched the empty street through bulletproof glass. 3 days since the warehouse. 3 days of waiting for Vicente's next move while Elena's children asked questions he couldn't answer. Behind him, Sophia's quiet sobs had finally stopped. The 8-year-old had cried herself to sleep on the couch after another nightmare about the men with guns. Miguel sat in the corner, 13 years old, and trying to be the man of the house, his jaw set in a way that reminded Marcus too much of himself at that age. You can't keep standing there forever. Elena's voice was soft but steady. She'd changed in the last few days. The terrified woman from the alley was still there, but something harder had emerged alongside her fear, a mother's steel. I can see 3 potential approach routes from here, Marcus said without turning. 2 rooftops with clear sightlines. If Vicente's people... Marcus. Elena moved to stand beside him, close enough that he caught the scent of her shampoo. When was the last time you slept? He couldn't remember. The warehouse had confirmed his worst fears. Vicente wasn't just expanding territory. The weapons cache they'd found, the communication equipment, the maps marked with government buildings. This was bigger than drugs and street corners. There's something I need to tell you, he said finally, about why Vicente wants me dead. Elena's reflection in the window went still. I'm listening. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. 2 years ago I had a family, a wife, a daughter about Sophia's age. He paused, forcing himself to continue. I was working private security then, tracking a weapons shipment that led back to Vicente's organization. I thought I was being careful, thought I'd kept my family separate from the work. Elena's hand found his arm. Her touch was warm against the cold spreading through his chest. They took them while I was following a lead in Tijuana. By the time I got back, he stopped, unable to voice what he'd found in his house that night. Vicente made sure I knew it was personal. Left a message saying this was what happened to people who interfered with his business. Oh, God. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I've been hunting him ever since. Every lead, every operation, every safe house. I've dismantled half his network piece by piece, but he always stays 1 step ahead. Marcus finally turned to face her. That's why he won't stop. This isn't about you witnessing the execution anymore. It's about finishing what he started with me. Elena stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. So, you're using us as bait. The accusation hit harder than he'd expected. No, You are. Her voice remained steady, but he could see the hurt bleeding through. You could have taken us somewhere safe, somewhere far from here. Instead, you're using my children to draw him out. Marcus wanted to deny it, but the truth sat heavy between them. Every tactical decision he'd made, every safe house he'd chosen, part of him had been thinking about Vicente's next move, about creating the right conditions for a final confrontation. It's not that simple, he said. Running won't solve anything. Vicente has resources, connections. He'd find you eventually, and I wouldn't be there to what? To get my children killed in your war? The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Marcus looked past her to where Sophia slept on the couch, her small face peaceful for the first time in days. Miguel pretended to read a book, but Marcus could see him listening to every word. I won't let anything happen to them, Marcus said finally. You can't promise that. Elena's voice cracked slightly. You couldn't save your own family. The truth of it hit like a knife between his ribs. She was right. He'd failed before, and now he was risking everything. Her children, her life, what was growing between them, on the chance that this time would be different. Before he could respond, his secure phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but he recognized the style immediately. The playground on Maple Street. 1 hour. Come alone, or the children join their father. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Elena saw his expression and grabbed the phone, reading the message over his shoulder. How does he know about... She started, then stopped. He knows about David. Marcus was already moving toward his weapons cache. Get the kids. We're leaving now. You said this place was secure. I was wrong. He pulled on his tactical vest, mind racing through evacuation protocols. Vicente's not just one step ahead anymore. He's been watching us the whole time. Outside, the morning sun painted the empty street gold, beautiful and deceptive. Somewhere in that peaceful suburban landscape, death was already moving toward them. The safe house felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Elena couldn't sleep, her mind replaying the events at the warehouse over and over. She found Marcus sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning his weapons with methodical precision. The familiar ritual seemed to calm him, each movement deliberate and practiced. You should try to rest, he said, without looking up from the disassembled pistol before him. So should you. She poured herself coffee from the pot he'd made hours earlier. When's the last time you actually slept? Marcus paused, a gun barrel halfway through the cleaning rod. Sleep's overrated. Elena studied his profile in the dim light filtering through the blackout curtains. The tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders never fully relaxed. She recognized the signs. Her ex-husband had come back from deployment with the same haunted vigilance. Is that what happened to your family? This need to stay awake, stay alert? His hands stilled completely. For a moment she thought he might not answer. Then he set down the cleaning rod and met her eyes. I was in Kandahar when it happened. Emergency extraction that kept my team in country for 3 extra weeks. Sarah kept asking when I was coming home, but I couldn't tell her. Operational security. His voice was steady, but Elena caught the tremor beneath. Turns out Vega's people had been watching my house for months. They knew my deployment schedule better than I did. Elena's chest tightened. How? Someone in the Pentagon was feeding them intel. Military families of operators working cartel interdiction. We were all targets. I just didn't know it yet. Marcus resumed cleaning his movements sharper. Now Sarah called me the night it happened, said there were men outside watching the house. I told her to call the police, that I'd be home soon. The line went dead before I could say I loved her. The coffee mug felt heavy in Elena's hands. Marcus. They made it look like a home invasion. Took their time with it. He reassembled the pistol with practiced efficiency. When I got stateside 2 days later, the investigation was already closed. Local PD said it was a robbery gone wrong, but I knew better. Sarah's wedding ring was still on her finger. Maya's college fund was untouched. Elena reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. That's when you started hunting them. That's when I stopped being a SEAL and became something else. Marcus looked at their joined hands but didn't pull away. I've been tracking Vega's network for 3 years. Getting close, gathering intelligence, but never close enough. Until now, because of us. Because of you. His thumb traced across her knuckles. You've given me something I thought I'd lost, a reason to end this that isn't just about revenge. Before Elena could respond, Sophia appeared in the doorway, dragging her blanket behind her. Mama, I can't sleep. Elena opened her arms, and Sophia climbed into her lap. Bad dreams, baby? I keep thinking about the scary men. Are they coming back? Marcus leaned forward, his expression gentle. Hey, Sophia, you remember what I told you about my job? Sophia nodded solemnly. You protect people. That's right. And right now, protecting you and your mama and Diego is the most important job I've ever had. He glanced at Elena, something unspoken passing between them. But I need you to be brave for a little while longer, okay? Can you do that? Will you stay with us? The simple question hung in the air. Elena felt Marcus tense, saw the war playing out behind his eyes. The man who'd spent years pursuing ghosts versus the man she was beginning to see glimpses of. The one who read bedtime stories and made pancakes shaped like animals. As long as you need me, Marcus said finally. Sophia smiled and settled deeper into Elena's arms. Within minutes, she was asleep again, her breathing soft and even. You're good with her, Elena whispered. Maya would have been about her age now. Marcus's voice was barely audible. Sometimes I wonder what kind of father I would have been if I'd been home more, been present instead of chasing the next mission. You can't change the past. No, but maybe I can change what comes next. He stood, gathering his weapons. I made some calls while you were sleeping. Vargas should have intel on Vega's next move by noon. We'll know where he plans to surface. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn air. And then? Then I finish what I started 3 years ago. Marcus paused at the doorway. But this time, I'm not walking away until I know you're all safe. That's a promise. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Elena held her daughter closer and wondered if Marcus understood that keeping his promise might require him to make the hardest choice of all, letting go of his need for vengeance to embrace something worth living for. The safe house felt smaller with each passing hour. Elena paced the narrow hallway, her footsteps echoing against the concrete walls while Marcus studied surveillance feeds on his laptop. The children slept fitfully in the back room, their dreams haunted by images no child should carry. "They're moving," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the silence. Elena rushed to his side, watching grainy footage of black SUVs converging on their old neighborhood, searching house by house. Castillo's getting desperate. Elena's stomach clenched as she recognized Mrs. Rodriguez's home on the screen. The elderly woman had always brought her children cookies, had watched them when Elena worked late shifts. Now armed men kicked down her door, their weapons drawn as they ransacked her living room. "This is my fault," Elena whispered. "All these innocent people—" "No." Marcus's hand covered hers, his touch warm against her trembling fingers. "This is what they do. What they've always done. You just happen to see it." She wanted to believe him, but the weight of responsibility pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. Every face on that screen, every frightened neighbor, their terror was the price of her survival. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. "Torres, he's got something." "The shipment arrives tomorrow night." Torres's voice crackled through the speaker. "Port 47. Castillo will be there personally. Biggest deal of his career. If you want him, this is your shot." Elena felt Marcus tense beside her. She could see the war playing out across his features, the same internal battle she'd witnessed when he'd first agreed to help them. "What kind of security?" Marcus asked. "Heavy, 24 men, maybe more. And Jake—" Torres paused. "Word is they've got your location. Not this one, but they know you're in the city. Castillo's putting $1 million bounty on your head." Elena's blood turned to ice. $1 million. How many killers would that kind of money attract? How many eyes would be watching, searching, hunting? "Understood," Marcus said, ending the call. He immediately began pulling weapons from hidden compartments, his movements efficient and deadly. "We need to move, tonight." "Where?" Elena watched him load magazines with practiced precision, each click of ammunition driving home the reality of their situation. "You have another safe house?" Marcus met her eyes, and she saw the decision he'd made reflected there. "I'm taking you and the kids to the border. There's a man I know. He'll get you across, set you up somewhere safe." Elena shook her head. "You're talking about tomorrow night. The port. You're going after Castillo. This ends with him dead, Elena. It's the only way." "No, it's not." She grabbed his arm, feeling the corded muscle beneath his shirt. "We run, all of us. Start over somewhere far from here." Marcus pulled away gently but firmly. "You think distance will stop him? He's got connections everywhere. Mexico, Central America, half the cities in this country. Running just delays the inevitable. So does getting yourself killed." The words burst out of her, raw with fear and something deeper, something she hadn't expected to feel again after David's death. "You think I can just walk away, knowing you're going to die?" Marcus froze, a loaded pistol halfway to his holster. "Elena, don't!" She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Don't pretend this is just about justice for your family. Don't pretend you're not planning to die tomorrow night. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the sound of a city under siege. I died 3 years ago, Marcus said finally. Everything since then has been borrowed time. Elena reached up, her fingers tracing the scar along his jaw. That's not true. I've seen you with my children. I've seen you laugh, seen you fight for something other than revenge. That man isn't dead. Marcus caught her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. For a moment, she thought he might listen, might choose life over vengeance. Then his phone buzzed again, and the moment shattered. Movement on the perimeter, he said, checking the security feeds. 3 vehicles, moving fast. They found us. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched headlights sweep across the external cameras. Marcus was already moving, gathering the children's few belongings, his face set in grim determination. Back exit, he commanded, shouldering a tactical bag. Stay low, stay quiet. As Elena woke Sophia and Miguel, their sleepy protests turning to fear as they sensed the urgency, she realized the choice had been made for all of them. Tomorrow night would come whether they were ready or not, but she also realized something else, something that terrified her more than Castillo's men. She wasn't going to let Marcus face it alone. The warehouse smelled of rust and motor oil, a forgotten industrial tomb where Marcus had arranged to meet Elena one last time before everything went to hell. She arrived 10 minutes early, her hands shaking as she pushed through the heavy metal door. The click of her heels echoed in the cavernous space, each step a countdown to the moment that would change everything. Marcus emerged from the shadows between abandoned machinery, his face grim in the dim light filtering through dirty skylights. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and a fresh cut marked his left cheek, evidence of his earlier reconnaissance mission to confirm what they both already knew. Vasquez had found them. The kids? He asked immediately. Safe. Sarah's watching them at the new location. Elena's voice caught slightly. She thinks we're meeting with a lawyer about witness protection. He nodded, studying her face with an intensity that made her stomach flutter despite the circumstances. Over the past 3 weeks she'd grown accustomed to that penetrating stare, the way he seemed to catalogue every detail of her expressions, reading her fears and hopes with unsettling accuracy. We could still run, she whispered, though they both knew it was impossible. Take the kids and disappear completely. Marcus stepped closer, his boots crunching on broken glass. You know that's not an option anymore. Vasquez has too many resources, too many connections. He'll keep hunting until... He didn't finish the sentence. Until we're all dead. Elena completed the thought, her chin lifting with the defiant courage he'd come to admire. So we end this tonight. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its execution. Elena would return to her old house, the one Vasquez's men were undoubtedly watching, and make herself visible, vulnerable, the bait that would draw the cartel leader into Marcus's carefully prepared trap. It relied on precise timing, unflinching nerve, and a level of trust that still amazed him. 3 months ago, Marcus Chen had been a man consumed by vengeance, a ghost haunting the edges of criminal networks, with nothing left to lose. Now he stood before a woman whose courage humbled him, knowing that failure meant losing not just his chance at justice, but the family that had somehow become his salvation. "There's something you need to know," he said, pulling a small device from his tactical vest, "about my daughter, about why I really started hunting Vasquez." Elena's breath caught. In all their conversations, he'd shared fragments of his loss, but never the complete truth. Now, with hours remaining before they faced almost certain death, she saw him lower the final barrier between them. Lily wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time, Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the pain flickering across his features. She was investigating Vasquez for her newspaper, following a story about trafficking routes through Austin. When she got too close, they made an example of her. The words hung between them like a confession. Elena reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his scarred knuckles. "You blamed yourself." I taught her to fight, to be strong, to never back down from injustice. Those lessons got her killed." His hand turned under hers, their fingers interlacing. "With you, with Emma and Jake, I kept making the same mistake, pushing you toward danger because I couldn't see past my own need for revenge." "That's not true." Elena stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. "You saved us. You gave us hope when we had nothing left. I gave you a war. You gave us a chance to fight back." The space between them disappeared, as if drawn by magnetic force. Marcus's hands found her face, thumbs tracing the delicate lines of exhaustion around her eyes. For weeks, they'd maintained careful boundaries, professional distance complicated by shared danger and growing affection. Now, with everything about to end one way or another, those boundaries crumbled. "After tonight," Elena whispered, "if we survive this, I want you to know that you saved more than our lives. You saved who we are." The kiss was desperate and tender, a promise and a goodbye, wrapped in the taste of fear and hope. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him, the cold machinery of vengeance warming into something more human, more fragile. Elena's hands gripped his shirt, as if anchoring herself against the storm they were about to enter. When they finally separated, both breathing unsteadily, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to keep you safe. All of you, no matter what it costs." "I know." She smiled, and for a moment the warehouse filled with something approaching peace. "Just promise me you'll come back to us when it's over." Outside, the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the industrial landscape in shades of amber and crimson. In 3 hours, Vasquez would come for Elena Martinez. Marcus would be waiting. The war that had consumed him for 2 years was finally coming to an end. The warehouse district stretched before them like a concrete graveyard, punctuated by the distant glow of sodium lights and the occasional rumble of late-night freight trains. Elena pressed herself against the passenger seat as Marcus navigated the rental car through the maze of industrial buildings, each shadow potentially concealing death. "Second thoughts?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from his frame. "About a dozen," Elena whispered, checking her phone again. The screen remained dark, no messages from Sophia or Tommy since they'd reached the safe house 3 hours ago. "But this ends tonight, or my children will never be free." Marcus pulled into an alley between 2 abandoned factories, killing the engine but leaving the keys in the ignition. Through the cracked windshield, they could see the target building, a converted shipping facility where Vasquez was reportedly holding his final meeting before fleeing the country. Intel suggested minimal security, but Marcus had learned to distrust easy targets. "Remember the plan," he said, checking his sidearm one final time. "I go in first, create a distraction. You wait exactly 10 minutes, then circle to the north entrance. If something goes wrong, I run," Elena finished. "You've told me 6 times." But even as she said it, they both knew she wouldn't abandon him. The realization hung between them, unspoken but understood. Somewhere in the chaos of the past week, their partnership had evolved beyond mere survival into something neither had expected to find again. Marcus reached across the console, his fingers finding hers in the darkness. "When this is over, don't," Elena's voice caught. "Don't make promises you might not be able to keep." He squeezed her hand instead, memorizing the warmth of her touch. Then the moment passed, and they were moving, 2 shadows separating into the night. Elena watched Marcus disappear around the building's eastern corner, her heart hammering against her ribs. The weight of the backup pistol he'd given her felt foreign against her hip, but she'd surprised them both at the shooting range earlier. Desperation had steadied her hands better than years of training ever could. The minutes crawled past. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the wind carried the scent of industrial chemicals and approaching rain. Elena counted her breaths, trying to maintain the calm Marcus had taught her. 7 minutes, 8. The first explosion lit up the night sky like twisted fireworks. Elena was already running before the echo faded, her feet finding purchase on the cracked asphalt as she sprinted toward the north entrance. The plan was in motion now, and there was no turning back. She reached the service door just as gunfire erupted from the building's interior. Not the controlled bursts Marcus favored, but the wild spray of panic. Her hands shook as she tried the handle. Locked. More explosions. Closer now. The acrid smell of smoke began to drift from broken windows above. Elena stepped back and fired twice at the lock mechanism, the recoil jarring her arms but doing the job. The door swung open onto a corridor filled with emergency lighting and the sound of shouting men. Following the layout Marcus had made her memorize, Elena moved toward the main warehouse floor. The voices grew louder, Vasquez screaming orders in rapid Spanish, his men calling out positions and demanding backup that wasn't coming. She rounded the final corner and froze. The warehouse floor was a war zone. Shipping containers provided cover for both sides, muzzle flashes lighting up the shadows like deadly strobes. Marcus was pinned down behind an overturned forklift, blood streaking his left arm but his movements still precise and deadly. And there, near the far wall, was Vasquez himself, older than his photos but unmistakable, barking orders while two bodyguards flanked his position near what looked like an escape tunnel. Elena's breath stopped. This was the man who had murdered her husband, who had torn apart her family and sent killers after her children, the man who haunted her nightmares and drove her to this moment of reckoning. She raised the pistol, surprised by how steady her hands had become. But before she could fire, Vasquez's head turned and their eyes met across the chaos. His face shifted from concentration to recognition to something like amusement. He said something to his guards, pointing in her direction. Marcus saw the movement and shouted a warning, but Elena was already diving for cover as automatic gunfire chewed through the concrete where she'd been standing. She rolled behind a shipping container, her pulse thundering in her ears. "The tunnel!" Marcus's voice carried over the gunfire. "He's making for the tunnel!" Elena peered around her cover and saw Vasquez moving toward the dark opening in the wall, his bodyguards laying down suppressive fire. In seconds, he would disappear into the underground maze beneath the city, and this nightmare would continue indefinitely. She thought of Sophia's tears, of Tommy's fear, of all the sleepless nights, and the weight of constantly looking over their shoulders. Elena stepped out from cover, raised her weapon, and began walking forward into the storm of bullets. The safe house felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Elena sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, watching Marcus clean his weapons with mechanical precision. Each click and slide of metal against metal seemed to count down the hours until everything would change. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, though they both knew the words were hollow. Marcus looked up from the disassembled pistols spread across newspaper. His eyes held that distant look she'd come to recognize, the one that appeared when he retreated to whatever dark place had shaped him into the weapon he'd become. "Reeves knows we're here. The warehouse was supposed to be our final stand, but he's too smart for that. He'll come at us, where we're most vulnerable." Marcus's voice was steady, matter of fact. "Your children are in the next room. That makes this personal for him now." Elena's stomach twisted. Through the thin walls, she could hear Sophia's soft breathing, the occasional rustle as Miguel shifted in his sleep. Her babies, who should be worried about homework and soccer practice, not cartel executioners hunting them through the night. "There has to be another way. We could run again." "No." Marcus's tone cut through her desperation. "Running just delays the inevitable. Reeves has resources we can't match, and he's patient. He'll wait until we're exhausted, make a mistake, let our guard down." He began reassembling the gun, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "I won't let your family live in that shadow." The weight of his words settled between them. Elena studied his profile in the dim light, seeing past the scars and the hardened exterior to the man who held her when nightmares struck, who'd taught Miguel to tie his shoes and helped Sophia with her reading. Somewhere along the way, without either of them planning it, he'd become more than their protector. "What about your shadow?" she asked quietly. "The one you've been carrying since Afghanistan?" Marcus's hands stilled on the weapon. For a moment the mask slipped, and she saw the grief he kept locked away. Some shadows follow you forever. Not if you let someone help carry them. He set down the gun and looked at her fully. Elena, what I'm planning to do tomorrow, what I have to do, there might not be a way back from it. Reeves isn't just going to disappear quietly. Taking him down means going to war with the entire organization. Then don't go alone. The FBI can't move fast enough, and I won't risk more innocent lives. I'm not talking about the FBI. Elena reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. You've spent so long trying to save everyone else that you've forgotten someone might want to save you too. Marcus stared down at their joined hands. I'm not worth saving. Not after what I've done. That's not your choice to make anymore. Her voice was fierce, certain. You think you're this broken thing, but you're wrong. You're the man who brought my children medicine when Sophia was sick. You're the one who sits up all night making sure we're safe. You're the one who taught my son that real strength means protecting people who can't protect themselves. Something cracked in Marcus's expression. The careful control he maintained, the emotional walls he'd built, for just a moment, they wavered. I lost my team because I made the wrong call, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Good men died because of my choices. And now good people are alive because of them. Elena squeezed his hand tighter. You can't save the past, Marcus, but you can choose what happens next. A soft sound from the bedroom made them both freeze, Sophia's voice muffled by sleep calling for her mother. Elena started to rise, but Marcus was already moving, checking the window, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. It's okay, Elena said softly, reading the tension in his shoulders. She has bad dreams sometimes. But Marcus was already at the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Car lights, 2 blocks away, moving too slow for this hour. The peaceful moment shattered. Elena felt ice flood her veins as Marcus moved with sudden urgency, grabbing ammunition and spare magazines from his gear bag. Get the kids dressed, quiet and fast. His voice had shifted into something harder, more focused. We're leaving in 90 seconds. But you said... Reeves got tired of waiting. Marcus was already moving toward the bedroom where Miguel and Sophia slept. He's bringing the war to us. Through the window, Elena could see more lights now, vehicles positioning themselves at strategic points around the safe house. Her hands shook as she reached for the emergency bag they'd kept packed, her mind racing through the escape routes Marcus had drilled into them. The hunt was over. Now came the final confrontation that would determine whether her family lived to see another sunrise or whether Marcus's war would claim them all. The abandoned warehouse erupted in gunfire as Marcus kicked down the reinforced door, Elena close behind him with the children pressed against the far wall of the adjacent room. 3 years of planning had led to this moment. Vasquez's final stronghold, where the cartel leader thought concrete walls and loyal soldiers would keep him safe from the ghost he'd created. Marcus moved like liquid death through the maze of shipping containers, his suppressed rifle finding targets with mechanical precision. Each muzzle flash illuminated another face from his nightmares, another piece of the organization that had torn his world apart. The same men who had executed his team in Kandahar now fell before him, their surprised shouts echoing off rusted metal. "Contact left!" someone screamed in Spanish, but the warning came too late. Marcus had already shifted position, using the containers as cover while he methodically dismantled Vasquez's defenses. Years of rage channeled into calculated violence, each shot a promise kept to ghosts that had haunted his sleep. Elena's hands shook as she held Sophia and Diego, their small bodies trembling against her. Through the thin warehouse walls, she could hear the battle raging, controlled bursts of gunfire punctuated by shouted orders and the clatter of falling equipment. She'd seen Marcus in action before, but this was different. This was personal. "Mama, I'm scared," Sophia whispered, her face buried against Elena's shoulder. "I know, baby. But Marcus is going to keep us safe," he promised. Even as she spoke the words, Elena wondered if she was lying. How could anyone survive what sounded like a war zone beyond those walls? Marcus cleared the main floor methodically, his tactical training overriding the emotional storm threatening to break his focus. Room by room, container by container, he dismantled 3 years of careful planning. But Vasquez remained elusive, always one step ahead, using his own men as shields while he retreated deeper into the warehouse complex. The familiar weight of his rifle felt different now. Before, it had been a tool of vengeance. Now it was a shield protecting the family that had given him something worth fighting for, beyond mere revenge. The distinction mattered more than he'd expected. "You cannot run forever, Marcus." Vasquez's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness ahead. "You think you are saving them? You are only delaying their death. I have men everywhere. More will come." Marcus didn't respond. Words were meaningless now. Only actions would determine who walked away from this place. He found Vasquez in the warehouse office, a glass-walled room overlooking the main floor where bodies now lay scattered among the shipping containers. The cartel leader stood behind a desk, his own weapon trained on the door, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. 3 years, Vasquez said as Marcus emerged from the shadows, rifle raised. 3 years you have hunted me like some ghost story my men tell to frighten children. But here you are, flesh and blood, and finally within reach. You killed my team, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. You sold us out to the Taliban for 30 pieces of silver and watched them die on video. Business? Vasquez shrugged. Nothing personal. Your government wanted intelligence. I provided it. Sometimes the intelligence was accurate. Sometimes it served my interest better when it was not. Your friends were simply unlucky. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in Marcus's hands. For 3 years, he'd dreamed of this moment, the final confrontation where justice would finally be served. But now, with Elena and the children waiting for him in the next room, vengeance felt like a luxury he could no longer afford. You are hesitating, Vasquez observed, his grip shifting on his own weapon. The woman and her children have made you soft, made you weak. No, Marcus said quietly. They've made me something better than what you turned me into. The shots came simultaneously, 2 weapons firing in a space too small to contain the violence they unleashed. Marcus felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, spinning him sideways as his own shot found its mark center mass. Vasquez staggered backward, his weapon clattering to the concrete floor as he slumped against the wall. Marcus kept his rifle trained on the dying man, blood seeping through his tactical vest where the shoulder wound burned like fire. He waited for the satisfaction he'd imagined for 3 years, the sense of completion that was supposed to come with revenge, finally achieved. Instead, he felt only empty exhaustion and an overwhelming need to get back to Elena and the children. Vasquez's eyes found his one last time. You think this ends it? You think killing me protects them? This war will never end, Marcus. Never. The words followed Marcus as he turned away from the office, leaving Vasquez to bleed out alone among the ruins of his empire. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, police finally responding to reports of gunfire, but Marcus was already moving toward the room where Elena waited, toward the future that seemed finally impossibly within reach. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Marcus kicked down the reinforced door, his rifle already spitting fire. Elena stayed close behind him, her heart hammering against her ribs as bullets whined past their heads. They had one advantage, surprise, but it wouldn't last long. Sofia! Miguel! Elena screamed over the gunfire, scanning the maze of shipping containers and industrial equipment for any sign of her children. Marcus moved like a shadow given deadly purpose, each shot precise and lethal. 3 cartel soldiers dropped before they could even raise their weapons. But more poured in from the sides, their muzzle flashes lighting up the cavernous space like deadly fireworks. There! Elena pointed toward the back corner, where she caught a glimpse of small figures huddled behind a stack of wooden crates. Relief flooded through her, quickly replaced by terror as she realized how much ground they had to cover under fire. Marcus grabbed her shoulder. pulling her behind a concrete pillar as bullets chipped away at their cover. "Stay low, follow my lead, and whatever happens, don't stop moving until you reach them." She nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. In the distance, she could hear Sophia crying, the sound cutting through her like a blade. They sprinted from cover to cover, Marcus laying down suppressing fire while Elena ran. A bullet caught the heel of her boot, spinning her around, but she kept moving. 20 yards, 15, 10, "Mama!" Sophia's voice rose above the gunfire, pure and desperate. Elena dove behind the crates just as Marcus slid in beside her, reloading with practiced efficiency. Both children threw themselves into her arms, Sophia with tears streaming down her face, Miguel trying to be brave but trembling like a leaf. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" Elena frantically checked them over, her hands shaking as she searched for injuries. "We're okay, Mama," Miguel whispered. "The scary man said he was going to sell us, but we're okay." Elena's vision went red for a moment, rage so pure it burned away her fear, but Marcus was already moving, his face a mask of controlled fury. "The exit's compromised," he said, checking the action on his rifle. "Too many of them between us and the door. We go up." Elena followed his gaze to a fire escape ladder 20 feet away, leading to a catwalk that ran along the warehouse ceiling. It might as well have been 20 miles. "I can't carry them both and fight," Marcus said quietly. "You'll have to." "I'll do whatever it takes." Elena's voice was steel. She gathered her children close. "Listen to me. We're going to run to that ladder, just like when we play chase in the park. But this time, you don't stop for anything. Understand?" They nodded, Miguel taking Sophia's hand with the solemnity of a much older child. Marcus rose, laying down a devastating field of fire that sent the cartel's soldiers scrambling for cover. "Go! Now!" Elena burst from behind the crates with her children, running faster than she'd ever run in her life. Bullets sparked off the concrete around them, but Marcus was a one-man army, his rifle barking death at anyone who showed themselves. They reached the ladder. Elena boosted Sophia up first, then Miguel, before hauling herself onto the rungs. Below them, Marcus backed toward the ladder, his ammunition running low but his aim still true. A sound made Elena's blood freeze, the distinctive pop of a grenade pin being pulled. "Marcus!" she screamed. He looked up, saw the small metal sphere arcing through the air toward the base of the ladder, and made a split-second decision that would haunt Elena forever. Instead of climbing, he sprinted away from them, drawing the explosion away from her children. The grenade detonated with a sound like the world ending. The shockwave knocked Elena flat against the catwalk, her ears ringing. Smoke and debris filled the air, and when it cleared, Marcus was down. "Stay here," she commanded her children, her voice barely audible through the ringing in her ears. "Whatever happens, stay here." Elena dropped back down the ladder, her heart in her throat. Marcus lay crumpled against an overturned forklift, blood pooling beneath him. But his eyes were open, and his hands still gripped his sidearm. "The kids," he gasped as she knelt beside him. "Safe. They're safe." Elena pressed her hands against the worst of his wounds, trying to stem the bleeding. "You saved them." "Good." His voice was getting weaker. "There's a phone in my jacket. Speed dial 1. Tell them Marcus Chen needs immediate extraction. Warehouse District, Pier 17. "You're going to tell them yourself," Elena said fiercely, but she could see the light fading from his eyes. "Elena." His hand found hers, slick with blood but surprisingly gentle. "Take care of them. Take care of yourself." Around them, she could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. The cavalry was coming, but she wasn't sure if it would be soon enough. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Marcus kicked through the door, his rifle already tracking targets. Elena stayed low behind him, her heart hammering against her ribs as gunfire exploded around them. Somewhere in this maze of concrete and steel, Valdez held her children. "Left corridor," Marcus shouted over the din, dropping 2 sicarios with precise headshots. "Stay behind me." Elena clutched the pistol he'd given her, her finger trembling on the trigger. 3 months ago, she'd been worried about grocery money and Emma's math homework. Now she was running through a war zone, praying her children were still alive. Marcus moved like death itself, flowing from cover to cover with lethal grace. Each shot he fired found its mark. These weren't just random criminals to him. This was personal. She could see it in the cold fury that had replaced his usual controlled calm. A burst of automatic fire chewed chunks from the concrete pillar beside her head. Elena screamed and dove sideways as Marcus returned fire, his face a mask of concentration. The shooter dropped, but more were coming. Always more. "Mama!" The voice cut through the gunfire like a knife through her heart. "Emma!" Elena started to run toward the sound, but Marcus caught her arm. "It's a trap," he said, but his eyes held understanding. "I know. But we do this smart, or we all die." He was right. She forced herself to think like a mother, not a victim. Emma and Carlos needed her alive and thinking clearly. They moved deeper into the warehouse, past shipping containers and rusted machinery. The air smelled of motor oil and blood. Bodies lay scattered where Marcus had passed through earlier. His reconnaissance had been thorough and deadly. A door slammed open ahead of them. Valdez emerged, flanked by 4 men, pushing Emma and Carlos in front of him. Her children looked terrified but unharmed. Elena's relief was so intense she nearly collapsed. "The famous ghost," Valdez called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "You've cost me a great deal." Marcus stepped into the open, his rifle trained on the cartel leader. "Let them go, Valdez. This is between us." "Is it?" Valdez smiled, pressing his pistol against Emma's head. The little girl whimpered, tears streaming down her face. "I think the woman has become part of this equation, just like your own family became part of mine years ago." Elena saw Marcus flinch almost imperceptibly. The pain in his eyes was raw, ancient. "That's why you've been hunting us," Valdez continued. "Not for justice, for revenge. Your wife, your little boy, what were their names?" "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "and Jake." "Yes, wrong place, wrong time, collateral damage." Valdez shrugged. "Just like these children will be unless you put down your weapon." Elena watched the internal war playing out across Marcus's features. He'd lost everything once. She couldn't ask him to risk it happening again. "Do it," she said softly. "Please." Marcus looked at her, and she saw the moment he made his choice, the moment he decided to trust in something besides vengeance. His rifle lowered. "Good," Valdez said. "Now kick it away." The weapon clattered across the concrete floor. Valdez's men relaxed slightly, thinking they'd won. They didn't see Elena's finger tighten on her pistol's trigger. The shot took the gunman on Valdez's left in the shoulder, spinning him around. In that instant of chaos, Marcus moved. He rolled sideways, coming up with a knife that appeared in his hand like magic. The blade took another Sicario in the throat before anyone could react. Emma broke free and ran toward Elena as gunfire erupted again. Marcus tackled Valdez, both men crashing into a stack of crates. Elena grabbed her daughter, scanning desperately for Carlos. The boy was pressed against the wall, frozen with terror, as the remaining gunman tried to get a clear shot at Marcus. Elena raised her pistol with shaking hands and fired twice. The bullets went wide, but it was enough to make them dive for cover. Marcus and Valdez rolled across the floor, locked in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Both men were trained killers, but Valdez was younger, fresher. Marcus's injuries from their previous encounters had taken their toll. Valdez managed to pin Marcus down, his hands closing around the former SEAL's throat. "You should have died with your family," he snarled. "Maybe," Marcus gasped, "but they're going to live with theirs." His knee came up hard, doubling Valdez over. Marcus rolled, grabbed his dropped knife, and drove it home in one smooth motion. Valdez's eyes went wide with surprise, then empty. The warehouse fell silent except for Elena's ragged breathing and her children's quiet sobs. Marcus stood slowly, looking older than his years. "It's over." Elena pulled Carlos close, holding both her children tight. "Is it really?" Marcus nodded, but his eyes held a different kind of pain now. Not the sharp agony of loss, but the hollow ache of a man who'd finally found peace and wasn't sure what to do with it.